Hi, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the NFL kneeling protests. As you guys may know, the 2018 NFL season is fast approaching. The preseason has started, and it seems as though many of the NFL players are once again partaking in this protest, the kneeling during the national anthem, or whatever the case is. And so if you're not familiar with the brief history of it, we had about 3 years ago, I think it was Colin Kaepernick began to take a knee. He was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. He began to take a knee during the national anthem. And when asked why was he taking a knee, he said he was protesting police brutality and racial injustice. And so for most of that season, he was basically taking a knee by himself. Every now and then one or two other players would participate along with him. But for the most part, he was doing it by himself. Now, after that season, his contract was up, or he didn't renew his contract, I should say, and no other team would pick him up. And so even to this day, he is still unemployed in the NFL. Can't find a job on any team, even though he was a relatively good quarterback. And of course, a lot of teams said the controversy that he brings and the extra drama, the negative attention is one of the reasons that I believe most people would say is the reason why he's not a quarterback in the NFL. So then you have President Trump in 2016 or 2017, I believe it was, that he made a comment about the protests, and he made some negative comments towards the players. And so then they all kind of heaped onto it. So it's not so much the current protest is not really about the original intent, which Colin Kaepernick said, which was about police brutality and racial inequality, because if it was about that, they wouldn't have waited until President Trump chimed in for them to start protesting. Basically, now it's an anti-Trump protest. So regardless of what they try to say, it was all, they got unified when President Trump made a comment. But I'm going to talk to you why I think that this is dangerous and counterproductive for what they say is their cause, what they say is the purpose behind the protest. This protest is not the right action to achieve their expressed goals and will end up being more harmful than helpful. Whenever you undergo something to this magnitude or this magnitude, it is important that it be thought through thoroughly. The issue must be clearly defined, and the outcomes must be also very clearly established. The outcomes can be somewhat tweaked and redefined throughout the process, but however, without a real tangible and realistic expectation of an outcome, any movement, protest, or the like will fail. It'll be a failure. When we study historically some of the protests that have, especially in regards to civil rights, you have things like the Montgomery bus boycott, where black people were protesting discriminatory policies that stated that black people were to sit in the back of the bus. This is in Montgomery, Alabama. And if a white person got on the bus, the black person was required to give up their seat. The whole story with Rosa Parks, who was tired. She said she refused to get up and give up her seat for a white person. She was arrested because of it. This is the actual definition of racism, because racism is systematic and it's institutional, and it was upheld by laws. So because this policy that the bus company had, that's institutional and that was systematic, and then there was laws that upheld that policy. That's what racism is. And the reason I make that clarification is because a lot of times we clump everything in, whether it's racism, bigotry, prejudice, bias, or things of that nature. And the reason it's important to define it, because you can affect racism, because if it's systematic and institutional, if there's policies or laws that uphold these racist thought processes or policies, then that could be affected. For instance, after slavery was institutional, it was systematic, it was upheld by laws. Then you had Jim Crow in the South. It was systematic and institutional. It was upheld by laws. And so then you had affirmative action. Affirmative action was put into place to fight against the racist, segregatory laws. And so many, whether it's a college or other institutions, corporations, they had affirmative action, which meant that they were required to hire a certain amount of people of color. That was because of the laws that were on the books. It was systematic. It was institutional. That's racism, right? But bias and bigotry and those type of things are not as clear cut. And so that's why you have to define it. And the reason, and I'm going to talk about why that is, why it's so important and why it should matter to us all, no matter what part of the, what part of this, what side of this particular issue you're on. So you had the Montgomery bus boycott. It was systematic. It was institutional, upheld by laws. It was racism. So in response to this real racism, black people in Montgomery organized a boycott. All the blacks in the city refused to ride the bus until these policies were changed and the laws were changed. They understood economics and the devastating effect that the boycott had on the bus company, and it forced them to relent, and they changed their policies. They clearly expressed the problem, they outlined their expected outcomes, and they unified and stayed the course until they achieved their stated outcomes. In 1963 in Cleveland, Ohio, they had the Sealtest dairy issue. Sealtest ice cream, Sealtest dairies, which also creates Sealtest ice cream. They had large plants in the Cleveland area, and they refused to hire blacks. Martin Luther King Jr. organized a boycott of A&P Supermarkets, which was a large distributor of Sealtest products. All the blacks in Cleveland were urged to boycott A&P. Within a couple of days, A&P pulled Sealtest products off the shelf, and within a week or so, Sealtest met with the black leaders to resolve the issue. Sealtest relented and made a proactive effort to hire black people. They clearly defined a real issue, they outlined their expected results, and they carried through a realistic action plan. Now let's look at the NFL protests. When Colin Kaepernick began to kneel, he said that it was in response to police brutality and racial injustice. When he initially began kneeling, he was virtually alone. Only a couple of players participated, and some even openly mocked him. And even when he lost his job with San Francisco, there was other players that basically they threw him under the bus. They didn't really have any regard for it. And of course, it wasn't until President Trump voiced his opposition to the kneeling of the national anthem that the other players piled on. And of course, to this day, as I stated, Colin Kaepernick is still unemployed in the NFL. And he wasn't a bad quarterback. If you recall, he actually took San Francisco to the Super Bowl against the Baltimore Ravens. They lost, but they just barely lost. There were a couple of seconds. They ran out of time at the end of the game. Kaepernick was marching the team down the field. So very easily, he could have been a Super Bowl champion quarterback. So he wasn't a slouch by any stretch of the imagination. He had signed a contract with San Francisco that was worth over $100 million altogether. So he was highly regarded as a quarterback at one point in time. Now, the problem with the black community as a whole is that we have become lower-level emotional thinkers. And when I say lower level, I'm not calling anyone stupid. I'm just saying we don't have a in-depth thought process as a whole. That's what I mean by lower level. And we're emotional thinkers. So we use knee-jerk reactions to combat perceived racism without understanding all the factors involved. And we have no clear, viable solution to the problem that we say that we have. We ignore the larger picture for the sake of immediate emotional gratification. Because of that, the ruling elite use this to manipulate us and keep us in the same position. So a lot of these protests we have, like Black Lives Matter, was started by a couple of African-American ladies or black ladies, but it's been funded by George Soros and the ruling elite. And so whenever you understand that someone like George Soros or part of the ruling elite fund these protests, you have to understand George Soros was a Nazi sympathizer, and he said he didn't regret back, during the time of the Nazis and Hitler in Germany, helping the Nazis. He was a teenager, but he helped the Nazis to displace Jews, which he identifies as a Jew. So, and he never repented. Even now, he still says that he didn't feel regret because of it. So you have to understand the motivation behind these protests. You have to understand who is behind it. You got to look deeper and not get caught up in this emotional back and forth, because what they've done historically is they have manipulated black people based on our emotions. And because we don't do the in-depth research to find out what's really going on, we miss out on it. And let me tell you, let me give you a little historical context. First of all, I see people raising the fist, black people raising the fist. And in the 60s, the Black Power movement, Black Panthers and the Black Power movement had the raised fist symbol. But the raised fist symbol is not the sign of Black Power. They adopted it. It's actually the communist symbol of Workers United. It came from Karl Marx and his communist philosophy. So back in the 50s, the communists infiltrated the civil rights movement, but they didn't care about black people. They were simply trying to stir up racial tension in America as a means to weaken the country and to implement communism in America. So, and you have to be careful what you ask for, because if we think that Jim Crow and segregation was bad, communism is 100 times worse, and history shows us this. In the 20th century, it's a term called democide. So more people died in the 20th century from what's called democide, which is when governments kill people, than any other source. So you had the communists in Russia, you had Joseph Stalin, you had Pol Pot, you had all these dictators that killed tens of millions of people. And so that's what happens when you have communism, or you have this dictatorial governmental system. And so again, you might be upset with Jim Crow and segregation in the South, but I promise you that communism is much, much worse. So we have to be careful who we are aligning ourselves with, and we also have to be careful what we ask for. So I just wanted to put that out there, that raised fist symbol is the sign of communists. Karl Marx was one of the founders of communism, and that's where that symbol comes from. If you look at Lenin and Marx and all those other things, they have the raised fist, Workers United. Secondly, you have to know who your audience is. So think about this. 70% of the NFL players are black. However, 80% of the people that attend games and watch it on TV are white. Most of these white people are passionate NFL supporters that make it possible for the players to earn these exorbitant salaries. And what I mean by exorbitant is the average income in America is around $40,000 a year per person. That's average. The average NFL salary is about $1.2 million a year. So due to the fact that 70% of the NFL players are black and among the highest paid, obviously this flies in the face of perceived racism in the NFL. So why invoke racism and inequality in a place where those things don't exist? Colin Kaepernick he's considered black, right? He's biracial, but he's considered black. And again, he had just signed a contract that was worth over $100 million. So racism, we would have to say, based on the definition of racism, it doesn't exist in the NFL. 70% of the players are black. They're some of the highest paid people in America. And Colin Kaepernick was a quarterback not because of race, but because of his performance on the field. There's a lot of black quarterbacks in the NFL. There's a lot of black, like I said, 70% of the players are black. So think about this. Why invoke racism and inequality in a place where they don't exist? As I stated, not only do you have to clearly define the problem, but you also have to have a realistic and viable solution. And statistically, police shooting blacks are not the statistical fact that people will say. It's not a real issue like they would say. Now, anytime a person gets killed, of course, obviously that's an issue, especially if you're affected by it, it's a real issue. But statistically, it's not the issue that they make it out to be. Racism has to be institutional and systematic to be racism. You can claim bias or prejudice, but they are different than racism. In order to combat racism, you should locate actual racism. Unless you can find where police have a policy that says we're looking to kill black people, then you're not actually addressing racism. You can say that maybe some police need more training about racism or bias or prejudice, but to lump everything into the category of racism is counterproductive and will cause failure in achieving our goals. Statistically, 2.5 times more non-white people are killed by police than whites. Yet, I have yet to see any images of a non-white person killed by police on the national mainstream media news. That is primarily because the news is looking for sensationalism to fan the flames of racial unrest because drama sells. And because black people are driven by emotions and not facts and logic, they usually take the bait. LeBron James also chimed in, and he tried to blame President Trump for using sports to divide us. But I would contend that it's actually the opposite. You know, when you bring politics into professional sports, I think it's a bad look. I don't think that that's the place, because, like I said, the owners, you know, you're basically hurting their product, and they're obviously not demonstrating racism on the field, at least in NFL. You know, they're promoting these black athletes because they're the best athletes, they're the best performers on the field, and so and you know, when you have a free market economy, the market corrects itself. So, you know, maybe they are racist, you know, maybe they are biased or prejudiced in their heart, but they're not demonstrating racism on the field. The people that are coming to the game, and I know people that are passionate, you know, white, non-black people, white people, that they go to the game, they spend a lot of money, their hard-earned money, you know, they take their kids to the game, they buy NFL, you know, products and jerseys and hats and all this other stuff that they buy, they purchase it with their hard-earned money. And many times you'll see a white family that their kids and the dad has on a jersey of a black player. So, you know, RG3, I remember I had a friend who was a Washington Redskin fan. He was a white guy, and he always had this RG3, Robert Griffin III jersey, who used to be the quarterback of the Redskins, and they had a lot of hope. He got a pretty decent contract. And so he could care less about the fact that RG3 was black. He just wanted him to help the team win. And that's what we see a lot of. So it's not the right place to invoke racism, prejudice, and injustice on the field. If we really want solutions, then we have to, like I said, I'll reiterate, you have to clearly define the problem, map out a solution, and it has to be realistic and it has to be viable. So if Colin, LeBron, and the other pro athletes are really trying to fight police brutality and racial injustice, why not actually go to the police stations where these incidences occur? Maybe even talk to the mayors of the towns where it's actually occurring. What these protests do is simply fan the flames of hatred and bigotry. Because there is no clearly defined problem, and because the protests are done at the wrong place in the wrong time, they can never achieve their goals because they have none. Ultimately, this will only serve to alienate a loyal fan base that is not operating in racism. And for those black people that think there is a real problem, they will most likely become disenfranchised and complacent because the nothing ever changes mantra will kick in, and they will feel like there's no point in protesting anything. So it's time for real strategies to solve real problems. And again, we got to get out of this emotional knee-jerk response to things that we see as perceived racism. We have to understand our audience, and we can't beat up people emotionally that have no real problem. Like I said, there's a lot of veterans that I know. I'm a veteran myself, but there's a lot of veterans out there who take offense to kneeling at the national anthem. So why alienate those people? Especially, why make them pay for something that they may not be a part of? And again, at the end of the day, these players are putting themselves at risk, because I promise you, if the NFL starts to lose a whole lot of money, then those salaries are going to go down. And so ultimately, they'll be shooting themselves in the foot, because this platform that they've been given with, you know, the NFL, which is one of the largest platforms that they can have, the amount of money and revenue that they have, these players, 99% of these players would never make this type of money outside of professional sports. And that's not a knock on them. But, you know, like I said, these salaries are exorbitant. They're over the top salaries. And when I say over the top, you know, the market says that that's how much money they can make. But ultimately, these guys won't make $1.2 million a year on average. You know, and some players make $5, $6, $10 million, $15 million a year. And but I believe that the minimum wage in the NFL is like $300,000, which is still almost 10 times the average salary for an American citizen. And so, like I said, I don't say they don't have a right to voice their opinions. I'm just saying that there's a lot of danger in protesting at the wrong place in the wrong time, because not only will you not achieve a goal because you don't have a goal set, but you're actually end up doing more damage than good. So when you get a chance, this has been Dr. Joe Green. Check out the 2019 movement. We have a lot of, we express certain issues that help to restore the black community and reconcile between races and between cultures and groups. And so we're about solutions. We're not about just talking about problems, but trying to define issues so that we can move into a place of wholeness and completion. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. Shalom.